Are we live?
We are live and we have a handful of attendees. Thank you, everyone. So we're not.
Sorry, we can't see you all, but
I see the names starting to populate. Um, we'll give it a couple minutes for those that are already on. We'll give a couple minutes to everyone else joining. We've got a really big crowd today. 100 people registered, over 100 people registered, but we max out at 100. So to all of those attendees who can hear us, but we can't hear you, thank you. There's Leslie.
Leslie, we can't hear you. Did you?
Um,
No, we can't.
Leslie and I will disappear once we get going. But first, we'll give another minute or two. It looks like we have about 22 attendees signed on. And as I said, are expecting 100 or closer to. So we'll give a couple minutes for everyone to join.
Tiny bit of housekeeping. I just want to say hi, Todd. So fun that you're doing this. And Barbara, it was great to see you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in a minute when you're back in the camera. Hi, it's so nice to meet you and to do this. And Courtney, thank you so much for joining us. This is really lovely. And I apologize, I've been very AWOL for the last 2 weeks. But they don't need me anyway, so it's fine. But I'm really excited about this, and it'll be so wonderful to listen.
Agreed. We're so excited to have everyone.
Yeah.
All right.
Very
good. Continue. I think here just one more minute, and then we'll jump on. We'll get started.
Great. I did want to mention that Guillaume, Todd was really excited, and he's written me several times and has was mentioning that he had, I think, been chatting with some Neutras as well, and so that's nice, and so forth. There's a generation of those folks who know each other, I guess.
I love that it continues. I like to imagine that there's some sort of like reunion or like alumni, like they get together, like the children of the architects of all these like really iconic places. All the kids that grew up in these homes kind of have a group.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we could probably jump in and sort of ease our way in here. The attendees are continuing to roll in. And Guillaume wrote, awesome. We do have, I'll start off with some housekeeping. And then probably repeat this again, but we do have the chat box. Everyone is welcome to comment. You can add links if you need, you can make various comments. If you do have questions, we will have a question and answer portion at the end of the talk today. And you are welcome to use the question and answer box for that. So there's a specific question and answer box where you can post a question, and we will attempt to get to all of them as we can. So, and as you can see in the chat box now, we did go ahead and give a link to the website, which I'll speak to in just a moment. All right, I'm just going to go in right into introductions. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Megan. I'm a member of the development committee for Friends of Schindler House. We are so excited that everyone is joining, and there's been such a good reception to this monthly Schindler's Talk. Friends, for those that don't know, Friends of Schindler House is a fantastic organization that was founded in collaboration with Pauline Schindler to take over the home decades and decades ago and basically help to preserve their mission. Their focus is maintaining the home, preserving the home, rehabilitating the home. And for those that don't know, it's actually nearing its 100th anniversary, which is incredible. It's as relevant as ever, which is exciting, and it's beautiful and in need of a bit of love. So we are gearing up with a fundraising campaign. And on that link, you can read about what the Friends of Schindler House are doing, some of the different efforts that they're going for, both the anniversary as well as the preservation, restoration efforts that continue. So an amazing group, much appreciation to them for, steering in this great house all these years. Wouldn't be there without them. We also have in the audience, as Leslie mentioned, a couple Schindlers and a couple Neutras, which is so fun and such an honor to have you here. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you to your families for their great contributions. We also, with these Schindler talks, one of our goals is to just continue the conversations and cover different topics, different aspects of the house architecture, even larger, broader subjects and how they all relate, and really just an opportunity to gather and talk, sort of like a salon. So we had great turnout last month, which was our first. This month we're excited to have Todd Cronan, Barbara Lamprecht, and CK Rowling, Courtney moderating, talking about the relationship and the work of Neutra and Schindler together. Next month, we have a great talk coming up too, and we look forward to sharing all of that information. And I think we're ready to go. So again, for all the attendees, please put your questions for the question and answer portion in the question and answer box. Anything else you can put into the chat. And with that, Courtney, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope to see all of your faces in person in the near future. My name is Courtney Rawlings, and I'm a PhD candidate at Emory University, writing about mid-century modernism in Los Angeles. And I'm honored to be introducing our two speakers for tonight. This evening's Schindler Talks, presented by the Friends of Schindler House, will be given by two historians of the mid-century, my very own advisor, Todd Cronan, and Barbara Lamprecht. Both Todd and Barbara will walk us through some of their favorite Schindler and Neutra buildings that are, by their measure, and I'm sure yours, off the beaten track. Dr. Todd Cronan is Associate Professor of Art History at Emory University and Editor-in-Chief of nonsite.org. He is the author of Against Affective Formalism, Matisse Bergson Modernism, published in 2013, and of the forthcoming Nothing Permanent, Modern Architecture in California, which will be out by 2022. He is also on the board of the Friends of Schindler House. Dr. Barbara Lamprecht is an architectural historian and author of Neutra, Complete Works, Richard Neutra, 1892 to 1970, and Richard Neutra, Furniture, The Body and Senses. Barbara's PhD from the University of Liverpool explored Neutra's roots in the late 19th and early 20th century emerging sciences, especially the work of Neutra's inspiration, Wilhelm Wundt, Gestalt aesthetics, and evolutionary biology and psychology. Thank you both for inaugurating what I'm sure will be an exciting series of talks. We'll be setting aside, like Megan said, a few minutes at the very end to answer any audience questions, or as many as we can get to. And you can find the link to ask a question at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a little button that says question. So without further ado, here's Todd Cronan.
Great. All right. I'm going to start to share my screen here. All right. First, I want to thank very much Megan and Courtney for organizing this event, and a special thanks to Barbara for agreeing to speak with us tonight, and also to Leslie Thomas for putting all of these Schindler Talks together for the Friends of the Schindler House. So what I'm going to do for the next 12 minutes or so is to compare two houses, one by R.M. Schindler and the other by Richard Neutra. Both of them are from the same moment, so 1948, 1949. I'm not going to go over the details of their fraught relationship, but Barbara and I would happily address that in the Q&A if it comes up. So I want to start with my favorite quote from architectural critic Esther McCoy. She worked in Schindler's office in the 1940s. She describes Schindler's practice as driven by an impatience to set up new problems for himself, right? McCoy contrasts Schindler's impatience for setting up problems with Neutra's search for the perfect solution to a detail. So Schindler pursues problems, Neutra pursues solutions. There's obviously a great deal more to be said, but that's as clear a formulation of the contrasting approaches as I can think of. It does seem that Schindler was lost at sea without a very clear and seemingly insurmountable problem to work through, whether it was an irregular lot, a hillside site, insufficient funds, difficult clients, restrictive local ordinances, or new materials, Schindler thrived under pressure. And these are the houses I'm going to speak to, and you'll see quite a bit of them over the next few minutes. If you look, for instance, at this early view of the walls of the Schindler house, it's an example of a major problem to solve. It has the appearance of a fortification, a castle, a defensive shield against man and nature. Of course, the experience of the house is anything but that massive weighted surface. It's a triumph over mass, creating light and space out of materials that seem utterly resistant to the demand. He does that at the house through thin slices of glass between the battered walls. You can just barely see them here, but this is inside the house, right? And you can see little slits in the walls where the light comes through. So that takes the weight off of those walls, and more specifically, right, through the use of the least weighted materials for the inner walls of the house facing the gardens. These are translucent sliding canvas screens right here. So massive, heavy concrete walls on one side, the most ephemeral, thin, translucent materials on the other side, canvas. So for Schindler, the problem is always how to make mass, weight, inertia, stasis into an active, dynamic, moving space. A Schindler house is in movement. It is in becoming. Form becomes form. That's what Esther McCoy writes. Schindler himself called himself a sculptor, not a sculptor of mass, but of light. He uses what he calls the Schindler frame, that's his invention. And among other things, that means cutting all the wall studs at 8 feet or door height, above which he inserts a clerestory course right here. So the 8 foot is about right here, right? So you'll see this really in almost everything. So I'll just go back for a second. You'll see it here. This is not quite 8 feet, but you'll see this, and above it is a clerestory, right? So glass up above it, and then the roof, or and it comes later in his work, multiple roofs. But you can see that this clerestory course runs the whole length here, all the way down past all the rooms. So it becomes one unified space. So he inserts this clerestory course, and above it, a roof or a series of roofs, right? The effect of this is to produce a continuous unified space throughout. And that's even the case here. You can see he cuts away the walls here. I think this is a kind of crucial effect. So you feel like the whole thing, no matter how large it is one big unified space. That's the effect of walking through these spaces. So the light is filling up the whole thing. The light from the clerestory illuminates the interior from all directions. These multiple light sources have the effect of forcing all the objects in the space to become active parts of the composition. That's how Schindler described it. So Schindler's late works are all about light and movement of a very particular kind. If you're not familiar with Schindler's late works, here are 3, I think, important examples. One is the Jansen House, 1949, up in the Hollywood Hills. This, the Lechner House in Studio City. These are all from around the same time, late 40s or early 50s. And the Tischler House of 1949, right north of the UCLA campus. These houses are not for everyone. And it's safe to say that no critic at the time had a clue what he was up to, with the exception maybe of McCoy. And many critics are still at a loss as to what to make of them. And one thing to notice here, of course, is this use of this blue plastic fiberglass paneling, which actually was filling up. So there was another 2/3 of this filling up the entirety of the space in this blue. So if you can imagine that as a kind of vast, again, a kind of unified space bathed in this blue light, which was rather quickly, it caused certain problems that are now covered up with plywood. But he's using this rather dramatic fiberglass blue paneling in these late works. So what happens in the late work of Schindler is that spaces seem to unfold like a scroll, or spin or rotate around a center point. The Tischler House, I would say right here, is a spinner, a work that seems to turn around the circular fireplace. So if you can see here in the plan, you can see how it kind of rotates around. You'll have here's the fireplace in the center, just off center, and it seems to rotate. I'm kind of interested in the idea that he has a kind of almost arrow, so you can kind of feel it turning in space around you. The late works have the feel of something like a clock, a wheel, or as McCoy describes Schindler's Last House, essentially a carousel, an open space with a merry-go-round in the middle. That's how she described it. The house I'm most interested in is this late work, the Arman House in Mount Washington, just north of downtown. And at first sight, it doesn't seem to move at all, but I want to walk you through it and show you how I think it does create effects of this kind of spinning or rotating motion. The Arman House has been rescued from oblivion by my friend Judith Schein, who has written several brilliant descriptions of it. The old guidebooks don't list the Arman House, and the complete list of Schindler buildings published by the Mack Center back in 1995 doesn't even include it, which is rather remarkable. What I want to do now is walk us through it step by step. It's a small 3-bedroom house, and the living spaces are arranged on one level. When you approach the house from the street, you're presented with what can only be described as an intentionally blank or inexpressive view. This is the problem he set up for himself, to break the fixity of this static right angle. It appears, this is on a kind of first view, as a white stucco L, an L shape. It's not right here is where we are. So this L, and this is what we're looking at here, an L around a play yard. Although we're given a hint that not everything is quite as it seems, because the roof shape does not exactly line up with the walls below. So one roof is parallel to the wall here. This one rotates just a little bit, as you can see right here. And this is, I think, crucial. And we'll come back to this in a minute. So then we'll move around the side. So if you're coming around this side of the house over here, then they'll be up on the terrace, which is right here on the left. And you'll walk along this here to the doorway right here, okay? And then we'll go inside. So as you walk in, this is not exactly what you'll see, but the doorway is right here. Can you see my cursor to the marker here? Is that visible? Okay. You will get a view diagonally across to this corner with the glass opening. So like many Schindler houses, one is entirely unprepared for the shock of the living room as one looks diagonally across the dramatic open corner view facing southeast. The living space contains various zones within the larger space. To the left, so here is the door right when you walk in, right? So you walk in here, on the left, you're going to see this eating nook right here and the kitchen behind it. So the house is composed of various zones within the larger space. To the left is the eating nook and kitchen. Moving further into the living room, you can look down the hall over here, which leads you to the children's bedrooms. This is that first L back here. And looking ahead, straight ahead, you'll see a fireplace and the dining room, which would be right here. And to the left, right here, is the master bedroom with its own terrace out here, okay? Now, you'll begin to see just how extraordinary and extraordinarily strange this design is by looking at the plan. So recall, this is when you come in off the street, right? This is the big L you see right when you come in, right? So that's in red. So there's one L here in red. The living room and master bedroom in blue over here. So this is where you walk, you walk in the door here. And you'd walk here, and this is the eating nook right here, fireplace over here, terrace out here, master bedroom over here. But as I want to point you to here is that this is also a big L. So you've got two L's happening. The one in red, the children's wing, this is the children's room, which is right here, and then the master bedroom and living room on the other. So the living room and the master bedroom in blue also form an L, but it doesn't align with the first one. And that is super strange. The second blue L is rotated 15 degrees off center from the children's wing. So there are two L's overlapping one another, but one has been tilted 15 degrees to open up a kind of here, a pizza slice or pie slice between them. This is something, a favorite of Schindler's. Now, Schindler has used complex overlapping grids before, but in the past, in almost every case, the grids resolve themselves by tucking colliding corners away in kitchens and bathrooms so you don't see them. Here, as I'll show you in just a second, these two grids overlapping are super visible. So in the Arman House and a few other late works, not only is there no effort to unify the two grids into a seamless image, but he flaunts the incongruity between the two grids or shapes. That is, Schindler allows the two grids to overlap one another without resolving them, which is, as I say, strange and totally novel. Now we're not quite done yet, because Schindler introduces a third overlapping grid here in lavender on the plan. You can see here, this is the line right here above the fireplace. Here, which is following along here. And as I'll point to in a second, that's what you're actually seeing right when you drive up, is the angle that comes off from this fireplace angle. So this third grid in lavender, which runs across the fireplace to the bedroom, this line is tilted another 15 degrees to create a 30 degree angle rotation away from the initial red L of the children's wing. The only other location where this line is apparent is along the edge of the roof that you see when you first arrive. I think it's crucial to the ultimate effect of this house that this third set of coordinates, the lavender one, is picked up when you first enter the house, when you have a first glance of the house. So you kind of hold it in your head from the beginning. I take this 30-degree line as a very significant detail, one that I can't really go into depth here, but what it suggests is that the space rotates or turns around an imaginary center. That just like the other more obvious rotational structures from the same moment, the Arman House also creates a carousel effect. Why? Because once you see the stepwise addition of 0 degree to 15 degree to 30 degree, then the next one, 45 degree, which is not visible but is implied, it sets up a sense of turning around the center. What makes the turning effect so dramatic here is that the problem he gave himself is to make dynamic a seemingly very static, inanimate set of right angles, to force them into movement, to enliven them. Again, this is the problem he wants to solve, these 90-degree static angles, to make them, as it were, do the opposite of what they suggest, put them into movement. And there really is nothing like this rotation effect out there in any other architect's work from this time. What it actually reminds me of most, although I won't press this point, is a work by a German artist, Kurt Schwitters. This is called Revolving from 1919 at the Museum of Modern Art. And I'm struck by the fact that Schwitters was born the same year as Schindler, that's 1887, and died the same year as his house, 1948. Finally, I want to point to two moments in the space where the two, not three, overlapping grids are plainly visible, like super visible. The eating nook, which is kind of nuts, freely combines the two coordinates, red and blue. So if you look over here on the plan, I mean, it looks strange just looking at it, but if you look at the plan, you'll see that some of the cabinets are on the 90 degree of the first L, and some of the cabinets are on the 15 degree turn of the second L, in the same, right next to one another. So you're gonna have cabinets on two different grid coordinates right next to one another, and walls are doing funny things here too. That's very peculiar. So the eating nook freely combines the two coordinates, red and blue, a fact that's, as I say, is much clearer in the plan. Or this is the piece de resistance, where the two coordinate systems overlap one another and are given quite extravagant, exuberant even expression in the raised terrace. And again, if you were to look at the plan, you can kind of see where he's just let the two fly here. Let the two grids that are overlapping overlap one another without any effort to massage that difference, to let them just be what they are. Okay. In my last few minutes, I want to consider a work from the same year by Richard Neutra, the Goodson House up in Laurel Canyon. Unfortunately, it burned down in 1979. This was actually a well-known structure, and it graced the cover of the Saturday Review in the 1950s. It too takes the shape of an L. Here's your L's. It's a little harder to see here, but it's going to be like this and this. Okay, and we're going to enter right here. This is the driveway entering here. Okay, So it takes the shape of an L, but its materials are quite traditional. This is typical of many post-war works by Neutra. It's redwood placed in board and batten, brick for the terrace, glass, and water. The water is this very large pool, actually extraordinarily large for the scale of the house, large pool visible here at the left. One enters at the knuckle of the L after following the curve of the driveway from the garage. The house is split along private and public spaces, just like at the Armin house, with the bedrooms at the very end to the right over here, and the living room, kitchen, and pool here to the left over here. Without a doubt, the living room is the most extraordinary and dramatic moment of the house. These Julius Schulman photographs show how the two sides of the glass walls of the living room have been drawn back, producing a seamless connection between indoors and out. Further on from the living room, you can just see it here. Here's the pool right here. So you're looking from the living room out to the pool here. And this is the terrace on the other side here. So this is the pool area. This very strange Schulman photograph has been taken from atop the diving board, looking back at the house into the living room and the kitchen. And there's a little guest room right here. Now, I played a small trick when I first showed you the plan. I tilted it 90 degrees from how he published it. Looked at this way, the correct way, you'll notice that it takes on the distinct shape of an upright figure. The pool is the head or brain of the structure, the living space and driveway, the arms, the bedroom and landscape below, the legs. Is that hopefully fairly clear? Head, arm, some kind of arm thing here, legs, right? Body here, torso rather. So the pool is the head or brain of the structure, the living space and driveway, the arms, the bedroom and landscape below the legs. In other words, Neutra includes a clear referent for his spaces. He pictures the body as the underlying genesis of the forms. This is not the first time that he did it, and you can see it again on the back cover of his famous book, Survival Through Design of 1954, where the nervous system overlays the steel structural frame of his famous Lovell House of 1929 here. But whether or not Neutra literally pictures the body underneath his structures, he was always fascinated with the nervous system and with neuroscience. And he always thought of his work in terms of its health-generating or therapeutic effects. The Goodson House was conceived as an organism, as a body that would provide health benefits to the actual bodies that interact with it on a continuous basis. So one crucial difference between Neutra and Schindler is that for Neutra, the body analogy is not meant to be recognized or seen. The structure has its effect on the inhabitant insofar as they are unaware of the processes going on behind the scenes. With Schindler, on the other hand, we're given a problem to work out. One must make and see the connections that are suggested by the nature of the space. And as anyone who spent any time in a Schindler structure knows, Schindler spaces obtrude on your experience. They activate your mind and body, while Neutra houses ideally recede into the environment, and the inhabitant is often drawn away from the space to the view looking out. And there's a great deal more to be said about the relation between these two giants of modern architecture, Neutra and Schindler. But here in this brief talk, I just want to touch on what I take to be some of the key qualities that define their work. Thank you. And now I'm going to stop sharing. I can hear the deafening applause.
And I guess I'm going to start sharing. Todd, thank you for that. I look forward to your book this fall, and where I know significantly more will be explicated and elaborated, and I look forward to that. All right, I didn't take my favorite building, certainly not the case with Schindler. I took buildings that are not houses, which are churches, but I wanted to reflect on the liturgical implications of how modern architects, these two, Apollo and Dionysus, ego and id, approach the problem of how to deal with liturgical space and the act of worshiping. So with that, can you all see that? Do you all see that? Okay. And you hear me, correct? All right. This is the Bethlehem Baptist Church. It's located in South Los Angeles on Compton Avenue as the main artery and 49th Street, so down quite a bit. On the left, you see the more idealistic portrait of the building, and on the right, you see kind of more how it looks today. It's, as Esther McCoy wrote, it's seen better days, and she wrote this 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I just want you to note too that Schindler produced a cross at the top that is 4 square. It's a cross in 3 dimensions, and he did that because he wanted to transcend the idea of a cross, a 2-dimensional cross, which he said was manifested pain. And his cross represented something community and going in all directions. But you'll note that at some point, just to make a good old-fashioned Christian point, someone has put on the top of the Schindler cross a very traditional symbol of Christian faith. This is the interior of the church. What we see here is something that is very atypical. It's bifurcated, and it opens out into a garden, a patio. It's basically enclosed at the ground level. There are windows, but typically those are screened off. And the light is coming in from above, and you can see the prow, that hinge at the corner, has got a cross tying that corner together. I want to spend a little bit longer time on the plan. In plan, you can see that bifurcated, the L-shaped structure. There's a classroom here, which was intended to take up additional worshipers. The pulpit is raised, and there's a traditional baptistry with a pool of water for baptism behind that. Here's Compton Avenue, and here is the patio. So the Compton Avenue is the major artery. 49th Street is a short side street to that, and the choir loft is actually way above the pulpit, so it's really not part of the congregation. And I'll read you what Schindler wrote about that. And he writes, in church, the congregation arrives, finds pews, and sits until services are over. Then they stand on the public sidewalk in front of the church to chat. There is no freedom of movement. People are incidental to the church. But in the Bethlehem Baptist Church, people are needed to complete the picture. When the congregation begins to gather of a Sunday morning, they have a place to stand and talk. There they get the feel of the community. Only modern architecture takes into account this social aspect of a church. This last remark is quite surprising, given the builders of millions, maybe, of mosques, temples, and churches, many of which have enclosed patios or side patios like this. And while there's the social aspect to a church, there's also the liturgical act of a church, which acts as one body. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Latin derivation of the nave, which means one body. And the the comments for the church came from the members. The choir complained that they felt distant from the congregation, and so they moved the choir somehow down to the floor of the church. Then other worshipers said, well, we can't see the other worshipers when we sing. Another another argued or said that there were no front doors to the church, and they didn't like the handles on the church doors because they weren't regular knobs. They reminded them of the doors to a car. And I think, having been raised as the daughter of a Russian, German, Canadian Baptist minister, and I have visited many a Black church and worshiped in them, I think there is quite the place for worshiping or gathering rather on a sidewalk, rather like being in the Vienna Staatsoper, where one promenades up the grand staircase to see and be seen, to be relegated to the 49th Street rather than Compton Avenue, where one can be seen and one's seen by one neighbors and peers, may have been maybe an unconscious disruption of what it means to be social. But Schindler is thinking as an architect. This is a very tight site, and he wanted to exploit the real estate, the potential of that site, and so he imposed what might be called liturgical novelties on the space, perhaps without considering what a Protestant congregation, a poor, relatively not well-off congregation needed, because while the patio is a wonderful place to gather, it's not necessarily the objective of a church. Here you can see it a little bit in a different, in black and white, same image. And on the right, an 1865 more traditional church where the pews indeed are fixed. There is the sense of the nave, the sense of a gathered body. It's also interesting that the cladding is very asymmetrical. There are sliding and thrusting planes, and those are reinforced by the panel structure. This is a wood frame and stucco building. And you can see that also, that same intersecting of planes and volumes at the Howe House, which is on the left, the interior above, and the below. Neutra had done the landscape design for this, which consisted of mounding the land up in front and providing transitions of landscape privacy. The grass in back is much more, there's a fulsome view, a flat plane of grass before the view. This has always intrigued me because this has been, in a way, transplanted to the church 20 years later. These square geometries. I want to move on to the Claremont United Methodist Church, which to me has one of the most banal facades of any Neutra building and possibly one of the most disjointed on the outside. So to approach it, and likewise, it is not on any street. I mean, this absolutely is set back from Foothill Boulevard. You can't see it from the street. So it certainly acknowledges the role of the car. And I want to emphasize too that I don't want to forget the role of Robert E. Alexander, who was quite an accomplished architect and urban planner in his own right, and who joined forces with Neutra on behalf of more commercial projects, including, for example, the U.S. Embassy in Karachi, which is now languishing and hopefully will not be demolished. And they are responsible for the original design of the Claremont the Claremont Church here. And this, to me, is exploding with possibilities in terms of solid and void, light and shadow. It's incredibly theatrical in terms of effect. On the left is one kind of an extraordinary event for me, which is a ground floor clerestory, which upends the idea of a church being a sanctuary that's cut off intentionally from the world. Here you see leaves and nature, what the gardener didn't get to, detritus. And to me, it obviously represents something out of the book of Psalms. His word is a lamp unto my feet and a light to my path. On the right is another obvious biblical phrase, I will lift up mine eyes into the hills from whence cometh my help. The asymmetry and the contrast of light and dark in this church have always astounded me. And in 1999, I had the opportunity to interview the commissioning preacher. Then that was Dr. Reverend Pierce Johnson. And I'm going to try to find you, his quote. Because I asked him, you know, Neutra's emphasis is on nature, right? The view out and Mount Baldy and the snow-capped mountains. And originally there was a very tall bird feeder right beyond those windows on the right. And I asked him if he didn't mind if the congregation paid more attention to the birds and the view than his sermon. And he seemed rather surprised at the question, and he said, there is no conflict between nature and theology. He said, God is in nature as well as the text, whatever keeps people alert, which I thought was a good way around that. But the quality of asymmetry, I also want to pull your attention to the asymmetry kind of in every way in this church between the pews. And if you've ever visited Otto Wagner's Steinhofkirche, the church affiliated with an insane asylum, as I recall, on the outskirts of Vienna, there too are some asymmetrical laid out pews there so that attendants could assist people who were struggling perhaps in a service. But here, Neutra gives the opportunity for larger groups of people to sit together and then smaller groups on one. But the diagonals here are always shooting out to the views. And on the right, you see the original sketch of that exceptional degree of asymmetry. So here, Neutra is not challenging, as Schindler does, the essential liturgical requirements of a church interior. He acknowledges that the church is a body of worshipers that have to occupy one space, but likewise, he's extending it beyond. I mean, we all know Wright's famous, I spell nature, G-O-D, or vice versa, I forget which, but Neutra has a different idea, a different definition of nature as perhaps not only the ground of being, but that which transcends a God. He's not, both of these men are agnostics, if not atheists, and it's intriguing to me that they were both commissioned, one by an African-American Baptist church, the other by plain-spoken United Methodist congregation. I'm going to finish very quickly, and I hope I still have a couple of minutes, with the Jardinet apartments. And I wanted to overlap a little bit Neutra's work with Schindler under the kind of absurd title of their group that they had for a minute in the 20s called the Architectural Group for Industry and Commerce. And I hope you all know the story of somebody who called the office, and a voice rings out, the Architectural Group for Industry and Commerce, and the startled response is, "Oh, I thought this was an architect's office. I'm so sorry." Click. But this is clearly Neutra's title for this long-winded long-winded expression. But this is the Jardinette Apartments, and of course, Jardinette means garden. This is an opportunity for workforce housing for upcoming second-tier Hollywood starlets and technicians and industry people to enjoy the benefits of cross ventilation and garden balconies and expansive views. And all these were privileged not for the aristocracy or not for the Hollywood rich and famous, but for the workforce. And this is Neutra with Schindler. There are Schindler documents and drawings at UCSB, at the Schindler Archives, that almost rival the collected drawings at UCLA for the Jardinette at the Neutra, for Neutra. And it's clear that Schindler is fully participating in this. I'm not exactly sure why Neutra gets all the credit. Neutra certainly availed himself of Schindler's expertise with concrete and with reinforced framing. But there's clearly a majority of Neutra drawings, but I'm not convinced that it's as strictly Neutra as my book and many others state. This is it on the left and on the right, and you can see the difference that paint makes, right? That there's a continuity between the windows where there's black paint applied in the spaces between the gangs of windows, and then this overarching L-shaped structure that was supposed to include rooftop gardens, and that was done in black. You know, if you know Josephine Baker's house by Adolf Loos, you see that black and white stripes. You're going to see it again when the work is being rehabilitated. It was workforce housing from 1929 when it opened, and the developer fled, not paying Schindler and Neutra, by the way, until 2017, when a developer who also went into foreclosure took over the property. Another came, they couldn't make it work, and now there's a third, and hopefully that is going to come to fruition. It's going to be for battered women and veterans with PTSD, and I think it's going to have a wonderful new exciting role in the city of Los Angeles. This is another couple of photographs by Isi and Walter Gropius when they were visiting. I love the cars. And you can see the impact that paint makes between the windows. And of course, Neutra, being Neutra, submitted this to the Museum of Modern Art show in 1932, and he was roundly chastised, I think by Hitchcock. I'm not sure whether it was I don't forget who, but that Neutra had implied that the windows were continuous, which would of course imply that there was some miracle happening structurally. But of course this isn't happening at all. It's paint. Here's the floor plan, and there are several different types of units, and hopefully we can have one day when it's disheveled, it's been a rat and pigeon fest, and it's a terrible place right now. So, but in 2 or 3 years, by golly, it's going to be great. I'll just leave you with an image I saw on the wall when I started working on the building in 2015. And for the first time, I wasn't invisible. Throughout the building, there were photographs and paintings of the Virgin Mary and birthday greetings and all sorts of of memories that people had put on the walls or pinned up. And I came across this and I thought, you know, I think that's kind of what architecture is about, a place where people are not invisible. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is the sound of applause for you, Barbara. Actually, we have like a perfect question that both you and Todd could speak to if you're interested, which is from one Emla, who wants to know if there's anything in particular that you would point to as the strongest evidence of the influence Schindler and Neutra had on one another. In the work itself, like in particular works, or just in form and thinking, like, could you kind of go over some of their similarities or influences?
I can speak to one thing, and I think that is remarkable that they both share, and which differentiates them from what might be called a kind of mid-century modern approach, is that Schindler and Neutra were not structural expressionists. So they both of them, and this differentiates them actually from the Wagner Schule as well. The church that Barbara mentioned by Wagner, it's very, he puts a great deal of emphasis on you recognizing how the thing was put together. So both Schindler, especially in the 30s and early 40s, and then Neutra really throughout his whole career, were averse to the idea that what you would do is kind of see how the thing's put together. That's not, there's no premium put on that. They both thought of that as a kind of engineers, a kind of engineer aesthetic that they feel like they were past in some way. And this is also kind of different from I think the international style, but also the California architects that were impacted by Mies in particular, right? So anyone like Craig Elwood or even the Eameses, less Koenig, but Elwood and company were very much about expressing the structure in ways that Schindler and Neutra they never thought was significant. And that's I think an important quality, is that when you walk through these houses, I mean, a simple way to put this is there's a lot of stucco, right? So the stucco walls of white stucco covers up the kind of the often just kind of chicken wire and wood studs that are behind it. So that at least I think is something that they deeply shared. There's a lot of differences, but that's something they both came to agree on, I think.
Yeah, many times Neutra expresses in a couple of his books that he was uninterested in revealing structure, as Todd says. I mean, he's much more interested in the dance of manipulating perception. And so anything that would interrupt the eye that he hadn't intentionally detailed is persona non grata in the composition. So I think looking back farther, I think looking at Lohse and his lessons in section and Wright's lessons in the corner window, and for Neutra maybe also Erich Mendelsohn in how you celebrate the corner as an automobile goes around the corner and picks up the curve of the glass and the speed of the corner. Obviously, well, I think, Schindler's obviously much more acrobatic when it comes to section, but there are many more Neutra buildings where space is not static. But I think that they're just not as many because his aims and objectives are different. I think that Todd's distillation of Schindler and Neutra into problem and solution. I mean, Schindler's, and I would say Lautner was also somebody who's also interested in a problem. How you create how you resolve a problem given materiality and working with that.
Yeah.
To that point, this is both kind of a statement and a question, but I was wondering, listening to both of your talks, it seems that both in the first Schindler House in Hancock Park and then in the Schindler Church, there's a problem. Well, I'm not sure about the house actually, but it seems like some portions of the house, how it's been laid out and organized, or the church, might be so alien to the way that we normally move about a space that the problem is also felt in the user. So I was thinking this a lot with what you showed us, Barbara, and then of course with, these, there's no flat planes, right, in Schindler's house earlier. And so I wondered if this was part of his intention, if he wanted, the user to be especially aware of herself in those buildings.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think they're aware. I think they are aware. It's Esther McCoy that says, Schindler houses are in motion because they kind of pull you along in certain ways. But I think it's really about a kind of mental acuity that they're meant to generate. So it's a kind of sharpening of the senses in a Schindler house. You're kind of always activated. I mean, some people find this kind of, hard to take. That's what I say. It's not for everyone, but they're very activated spaces in which you are meant to be as kind of engaged as the architecture. So even in the Bethlehem, right? This kind of it's setting up again his problem there, like in the beginning with the How House, is this box, again, kind of square 90-degree angles, and then this jutting diagonal that cuts right across it. So this kind of shifting that happens to your senses there it's quite jarring, and it's intended to be jarring as to kind of unseat what he takes to be these kind of static forms. And that seems to me what Schindler's after from beginning to end is he'll set up some kind of assumptions about how we interact with the space, assumptions about kind of geometries, static, flat, plane geometries, and then he'll tweak it in such a way that it will make it active, will kind of dynamize the space. But again, it can be kind of intense. Whereas with that Claremont church that Barbara showed, right, it's this sweeping. That drop, the line in the ceiling is quite remarkable, right? It kind of gives you this kind of arrow that points you out, and you're kind of like pulled out, extruded, right, to this view out in the distance. It's a very different sense of how the space functions when you're in it, I think.
We have a question from the audience, which is from Raymond Neutra. Is there anyone before Schindler who created such strong functional relationships between indoors and outdoors? I think here it's like before Schindler, and of course, Neutra's best known for this, but Schindler, of course, is pressing on this idea as well.
I mean, that's not Los. I'll say that. I don't think Los has that's a huge, remarkable difference that Schindler and Neutra coming out of a Viennese world where this is not the thing. I mean, Wright is, I guess, the obvious answer, right? Is that Wright is the one that really imagines the landscape as part of the house in ways that the Europeans just weren't thinking. And this was the revelation for European architects, is seeing Wright's work in 1912. Just, I think they were totally blown away by the ways in which the architecture can jut out into the landscape. And this is very, very apparent in Mies's projects in the early 20s, which are extremely Wrightian in the sense that they're kind of almost tentacles sweeping out into the landscape. But I can only think of Wright as an instance. What's your thought, Barbara?
Well, obviously I'm thinking of the country house by Mies, which has got all these tentacles reaching out. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful building. a wonderful idea. Um, no, I think of Viennese houses where you're out on the street, and then you're in this portico area, closed in on both sides, and that's a slightly less chilly space. And then you're in the stairwell going up to all the flats, and that's slightly warmer. But it's not until you've reached stage 4 where you're actually in warm air. And so and Lowe's, particularly, um, he has nothing to say to landscape. Um, he's he's mute to it. His step terraces notwithstanding, you never see anybody actually standing on them, or few. So I kind of have to agree that right seems to be in pulling in and acknowledging, and that maybe the precedents are not in architecture but in literature, and in Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, where that flavor of um, the outside, the land, the earth, nature is all fueling, right, as well as his commitment to being a farmer. He was also a farmer. He had a working farm in Taliesin and Spring Green.
That's great. We also have a comment from the chat that kind of expands on this topic. Jonathan asks, doesn't Wright see the house as part of the landscape rather than the other way around? His houses are almost the opposite of what Neutra does. Do you guys have a response to that?
I didn't hear the first part of that, please.
Doesn't Wright see the house as part of the landscape rather than the other way around? His houses are almost the opposite of what Neutra does.
I think it depends on what period you're talking about with regard to Wright. I mean, I know that, I've never experienced falling water as particularly, I don't know, that presides over a stream. Um, and in fact, there's a house, um, it, there's a house by Neutra. It may be, I forget which house it is at the moment, but I had asked the owner, what she thought of falling water, and she said, "Well, there you're over the stream, and I wanted to be part of the stream." It might have been um, Connie Perkins, but in any case, I'm not so sure. I think of Wright's houses as being subservient to the landscape.
I mean, this is California modern architecture's gift to the world, right? The casualness of the connection between inside and out. I mean, Wright's is still formal. There's still a kind of formal quality to those spaces, which in Schindler, from the beginning, has this kind of easygoing, down on the ground, up and up, give and take between inside and outside. And I just don't think. I mean, I don't know if there is any kind of precedent for that. And Neutra is in the same way. I mean, the way that those walls just pull them back and you're outside. There isn't any, I think, models for that.
Not in Western architecture, anyway.
Right.
No.
Right.
Alexis wants to know if you guys can speak to how Neutra and Schindler were differently involved with the actual building of their projects. So she notes that Schindler was involved in the actual physical building of his work, but how was his involvement different than Neutra's, who was maybe more interested in the design part rather than the literal physical building?
I think Schindler took a big lesson from Loos in that regard. That Schindler is a builder as well as an architect. I mean, he designed, he built a lot less. He was on site a lot more. I mean, he used beach sand in Pueblo Rivera, down south. He was always trying trying things. I mean, Neutra's using diatomaceous earth in his diatom houses. He's he's absolutely in command of a detail, and as Todd alluded to before, I mean, it's all about refining the detail and then sending out the spec book and being able to have such control of it from LA that you could send that spec book and a set of plans anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, and someone would be able to understand and interpret it. But very much. I mean, if you look at all the drawings for both offices, I mean, these are people who are intensely committed to site design, to location, to soils, to orientation of the sun, and all that. So Neutra didn't visit as often as maybe Schindler was on site all the time, but that doesn't mean that he didn't have as acutely a command and interest in the project.
I'm the one thing I get slightly anxious about with, I mean, it's absolutely true that Schindler was on site and was his own contractor for most of the houses. And from what we know, from really from 12 o'clock until late at night, or, it's about 7 o'clock, he was at the site. I think that sometimes lends itself to the idea that these houses are improvised. That's just not the case at all. So the literature on Schindler changed dramatically from his first generation with David Gebhardt and company, great service, to people like Lionel March and Do the Shine and Jinho Park, who showed that there was an underlying order to these things, which I'm certainly, the Arman House shows that. They're not improvised, at least in an obvious sense of improvisation at all. These are highly refined and calculated, even if they're not, craft is not what it's about. He's not interested in the kind of crafting, the fine detail, but it doesn't mean that it's not organized and ordered. So I just, it's totally true that he was on the site but he's not hammering 2x4s necessarily. And there is a plan for these houses, and they're incredibly well worked out. And I just want to stress that as being the case.
Thank you for that realignment.
Well, thank you guys both so much for giving these presentations. We're going to hand it back to the Friends of Schindler House, but I hope you can hear the applause from the audience in your ears. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much. That is fantastic. I wish we could keep the conversation going. We're all on the back end like, no, why the time? We just want to keep talking about this. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your very thoughtful questions. And of course, thank you very much to Courtney, our fearless moderator. Good luck with the rest of your dissertation. And Todd, Barbara, your expertise is fantastic. We appreciate your generosity. Thank you so much. Everyone go buy their books. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Leslie.
Hi, I'm going to echo my thanks, both for my fellow board member, Todd, doing this with me, Barbara from joining us, and Courtney for walking us through this fascinating conversation. I learned a lot, and I could have listened to all evening. So this reminds me that when we start doing things hybrid and in person, maybe this is a dinner or an event or something that we can expand at the house, at a Neutra house, and in lots of other places. I'm just here to say a couple of things. One is, we are really, really excited to be building community around Friends of the Schindler House and around the Schindler House. The house turns 100 years next year. It has inspired so many people. We are working very hard to allow it to inspire many people to come. We have to raise $1 million or something like that. There's rounding errors. All of you can help. You don't have to give us $1 million, but you will become part of our community to let the world know about the need, so that we can have these conversations and we can use the house to inform designers and urban citizens and landscapers and everybody else, for years to come. So please jump into the website, which I think has been put in here a few different times. Get in touch with us, suggest ideas for conversations, allow us to be inclusive to you and your communities. And if you want to become a friend, we're really interested in talking about that. Before I close, I want to say one small and it's slightly personal note. We in this board follow the tradition of those who founded the Friends of the Schindler House. That includes Michael Bobrow, who was one of the first people who formed a wonderful relationship with Pauline Schindler. It was something that he treasured for his whole life. And he was very proud to be part of this group. He passed away this week. He is my stepfather and I will miss him very much. But most importantly, in terms of this conversation, he's one of the founding members of the Friends of the Schindler House. And he would be really thrilled to have been part of this conversation today. So I hope you have a great week, month. You'll join us with Judith Shine and Tim Sakamoto will be coming next. We'll be sending out lots of information about that. So we'll see you again. Bye.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Courtney. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, guys. That was great.
Thank you all.
Mine. That was so much fun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.